So, hello everyone, and welcome to today's Turing Scheme live question and answer session for the higher education sector's potential applicants for placements in the 2026 to 27 academic year. My name's Martin, and I work with the Turing Scheme team. I'm going to be introducing the slides today, and then I'm joined by several colleagues who will be able to answer the questions that you want to raise during this call. I'll begin with some basic housekeeping. So to let you all know, today's session is being recorded and will be published subsequently on the Department for Education's YouTube channel. As a result, attendees' cameras and microphones have been disabled. So if you can use the Q&A bar, it's an option. It's usually on the top right hand of the browser. That will enable you to submit your questions throughout the webinar, and we will endeavour to answer as many as we can during this session. Please note, your questions that you put into the Q&A will be displayed to others. First of all, if we are unable to answer any questions today, we'll take them away to answer by correspondence or advise you, for example, to contact the help desk if it involves more details that are required for us to answer. And do consider the help desk as we continue with your planning process if your query is more urgent or personal. As the information that we're discussing here will be recorded, just bear in mind in terms of personal circumstances of your cohort, etc., in framing your questions. And then to ensure that the session today remains focused on assisting those who are seeking to apply for funding for the next academic year of the Turing Scheme, we won't be answering any questions about the current 25 to 26 academic year's projects. If you do have anything related to a live project, these should be referred to us via the Turing Scheme inquiry form as normal and will be picked up by help desk. So as I mentioned at the start, this is a session for providers considering an application for funding in the 26-27 academic year, specifically in the higher education funding stream. We've already published an overview of the guidance for this academic year and the application process. This is on gov.uk. We've also published supporting YouTube videos, which are aimed at both those new to the scheme, which are by sector called an introduction to the Turing Scheme for the relevant sector, and also one on the changes, which is aimed more at people who've previously applied. And then we have a separate video which covers the assessment criteria. From the start, this webinar really depends upon your presentation. We'll have a few questions that we've already received that we'll cover off at the beginning, but the bulk of this is entirely dependent upon the questions that you bring to this forum today that we can consider answering. So please add questions to the Q&A as we go through, and we'll keep reviewing these and try, as I say, to answer as many as we can. And all of this is part of providing you with the assistance that you need to produce your applications and make them as good as possible. We hope that you will be able to apply for funding this year and wish you all the best for your applications. What we'll do now is start by looking with my colleague Pete and Caroline at some of the questions that we've previously received that we think it's good to answer in front of you all. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Martin. Hi, everybody. My name's Pete. I lead the policy and comms team here in the Turing Scheme team at DFE. So I'm just going to cover a few things that were asked in advance, and then we'll move on to the open Q&A. So in our applying and assessment YouTube video, we refer to enhancing transferable skills. And some people have asked us what the different categories of student outcomes and skills are that we're looking for this year, as we have adjusted the assessment questions. You'll find more guidance on these on the guidance page entitled Apply for Funding for International Placements, where we set out the assessment criteria in more detail. But there are, sort of to summarize, there are 4 types of student outcome categories that we're looking for. So broadly speaking, those things are transferable skills. So those are abilities that can be applied in different settings that support success in study, employment, and everyday life. Intercultural learning and global awareness, so understanding and respecting different cultures and perspectives, being able to manage and survive and thrive in diverse environments. Personal developments, that's growing personal skills such as confidence, independence, resilience, and self-awareness to help manage change and overcome challenges. And also subject-specific knowledge and skills, So that might be knowledge or skills that are directly linked to a student's course or their field of study that they'll get through practical experience or exposure to a new environment and different approaches. So those are the 4 areas that we're looking for when we ask you about skills, and you'll find more of a description on that in our refreshed guidance this year. We've also had questions in advance around whether we can move funding between categories, and the short answer to this is we will provide guidance in due course about how you can move funding around this year. As you'll know, there are sort of some rules about what you can and can't do for the current year, and if you're successful in applying, you'll receive guidance on managing your Turing Scheme project for 26-27 on moving money around. So that will come in due course. So for now, for your application, you should focus on applying for funding using the funding categories as they are and the funding buckets as they are. I don't think anyone in this audience particularly will have any challenges with this, but just in case, if you are applying for Turing Scheme funding for the first time, there are 2 sign-in routes that you'll need to use, and so some have queried how they can set up a Turing Scheme account. So if you are a university based in England, you should organisationally have a DFE sign-in account, which you can use to access the Turing Scheme service. If you don't have one of those, because, for example, you're based not in England, you can set up a local Turing Scheme account, which is an account just for accessing the Turing Scheme service. And when you apply, the journey should take you through to help you work out which one of those accounts that you need and allow you to access those things. It should, as I say, channel you towards the appropriate account if you don't have one already. But if you do have any concerns or issues, please do contact the help desk using the inquiry form and they'll be able to help you out. And finally, we've also been asked questions about whether you can download a Word version of the application form. So we're only providing a Word version for Welsh language applicants this year, which is available on the apply page. But one thing we would sort of emphasize, if that's a concern of yours, is that the questions and lots of supporting guidance are available on that apply for funding page. So you can prepare your application using all of that information there. And then you can set up your account in advance and you can go in and out of a Turing Scheme application, save and return. You don't need to do it all in one hit. So if you're concerned about preparing everything in advance, then you don't just have one go to go into the application, you'll have multiple goes, which I hope will help with that. Okay, so now I think we'll move into your updated Q&A in the session. So I think I'm going to hand over to Caroline, who's going to kick us.
Thanks, Pete. So our first question from Rachel. Becca, I think you've already answered this, but I will read it out in case there's anything to add. So will an institution's previous spend of Turing Scheme funding be considered by DFE when allocating funding? Becca, you have put a response here, but is there anything else you'd like to say on that?
Nothing further to add. I think just to say that we consider a range of things when allocating funding, so it comes down to each year. But yeah, this year we will be potentially looking at whether providers have persistently underspent their previously allocated funding.
Thanks, Becca. And I was just going to add on that, Becca, if you don't mind, that if when we're using that data, we'll be looking at that in relation to how much funding a provider gets as opposed to whether they are successful at all. So it's about just to sort of manage sort of expectations about how we would theoretically do that. It wouldn't necessarily be about whether you get funding, which would be to do with your application score, but it would be to do with how much of that funding you receive and how much your application is scaled down by using multiple years of data.
Thanks, Pete. Next question, might have to break this down into sections. So with the change regarding overseas fee status, if proposing a placement in the student's country of ordinary residence, you should ensure that this is justified by the outcomes of the placement over alternatives. Can we reasonably infer that 1, we only have to provide this for students with overseas and not home fee status? 2, by country of ordinary residence, you are referring to domicile. And 3, nationality of the participants is not being referred to. That is, some students whose nationality matches the destination country is not where they are domiciled. Pete, is that one for you?
Yep, that's quite a big one, but I can break it down. So start with the third point. This isn't about nationality. We're aware that some students may have a nationality from a country that they haven't ever lived or haven't lived for a long time. This change is focusing on making sure that if students have come to you in the UK to study and they then want to go on a overseas placement back at the location they come from, you are confident that this is justified by the outcomes as opposed to an alternative destination, bearing in mind that one of the features of international experience is getting experience in a different context and setting. So it's not about nationality. We're not explicitly asking you to provide upfront justification of these placements, but we do expect you to be confident in this when you are allocating placements. So you won't specifically need to detail that at application stage. You won't need to set it out formally, and so you won't need to provide it to us unless we ask you about that. In terms of by country of ordinary residence, what we mean is, because there's different terms in use in different student finance systems. What we mean is the country that the student was living in before they came to the UK to study. So if they're from an overseas, if they have that overseas fee status, it's the country they were before they come to the UK to study. I hope that answers that one.
Thanks, Pete. Next question, how much funding is available for higher education in 2026-27?
So unfortunately, we can't provide that yet. We'll confirm that in due course, and we will update our guidance and send round comms when we do so.
Thank you. Next question from Donna. Is there any possibility of pushing out the deadline for Turing Scheme applications for 26-27, as many of us will also be preparing an application for an Erasmus Charter for Higher Education, which has a submission deadline of the 24th of March and is a substantial piece of work?
So unfortunately, I think, and I'll just, if any colleagues want to come in on this, then please correct me, but I'm afraid the answer is no, on the basis that we're very committed to making sure you get your funding outcomes in June. So in between that time, we need to make sure that all applications can be thoroughly assessed and double assessed and quality assured. So unfortunately, we won't be able to change that deadline.
Thanks, Pete. Next question. Each year we submit our project plan, including payment details and the predicted number of students from undergraduate, master's and PhD programs. However, the funding awarded isn't enough to support all undergraduate disadvantaged and SEND students. Should we focus our application only on undergraduates or also include master's and PhD students who make up most of the cohort?
Ultimately, this is one of those things that it's quite difficult for us to advise you on because it's about your organizational circumstances. We don't have any particular rules about what preferring which phase of their higher education someone is in, what level they're studying at. We are particularly interested in prioritizing support for those students that otherwise wouldn't be able to go, such as disadvantaged students or students with SEND. So I'm afraid I can't quite advise you, but if I haven't quite hit the nail on the head of what you're asking, then please ask another question and we'll come back to it, or put something into the help desk. Apologies if I haven't quite answered that.
Thanks, Pete. Next question, is this the last year of Turing funding now that Erasmus is back?
So we'll confirm any information on future years of Turing in due course. Unfortunately, not any more details that we could share at this point.
Okay, next question from Emily. Do you have any suggestions on measuring impact outcomes for previous Turing funding to help evidence future applications?
So obviously, we don't want to be overly leading, and there is information on the guidance on applying for funding, but the things that you might want to consider might be student surveys during and post placements and their student reported outcomes. You might want to look at, for example, some institutions have used employment outcomes and have used attainment outcomes as well. But there are various things you could use. We are open to suggestions on what you use, but one of the things we're looking to see is that you have considered how you're going to assess what those impacts are and what the outcomes are.
Thank you. Next question. Are there any plans to make Turing to cover multi-yearly funding in future? For planning and promotion, this would be very beneficial.
Listen, we hear your feedback on this, and we know that it's something that the sector's been asking for a long time. We'll confirm any details on future years of the Turing Scheme in due course, but we obviously do hear that, and would obviously highlight that there will also be available Erasmus Plus funding from 2027, and that will have its own set of rules around that too.
Thank you. Next question. When reviewing previous year's grant utilisation, do you take into account that a certain percentage of underspend is expected? This is because we aim to keep the prioritisation criteria consistent, which can prevent us from fully utilising the grant. Therefore, an underspend does not necessarily mean that we would be unable to use a higher grant amount.
Yeah, I can come in on this, and then I might invite Becca to add something too. So yes, of course, we do understand that the underspend happens because circumstances change, and it's a large amount of money to manage with many moving parts. I guess if we use underspend in funding allocations, what we were looking at is about persistent patterns over time, and looking at if there are institutions that particularly stand out as being consistent underspenders compared to their peers. It's not about that we expect 100% utilization every time, but we would be looking at if there are persistent patterns over multiple years of funding, that would suggest that organizations are particular outliers, I guess, when it comes to grant utilization. Becca, would you say that's fair? Are there anything else to add there?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I think that's helpful, and I think it's worth pointing out that we're not kind of going after a few pounds here and there. It's about trying to identify those patterns and make sure that the money is used to the best of our ability, basically.
Thank you both. The next question picks up from an earlier question, but from Julia. The guidance notes that institutions with a history of persistent underspends on previous projects may be subject to additional scrutiny or have their applications rejected. Will the assessment process take into account the reasons for those underspends? For example, if an institution has reported an underspend specifically because it adhered strictly to its disadvantaged learner targets, will this context be considered when evaluating its track record?
Yeah, we'll consider any contextual information that we can in doing this, but I think I would emphasize that we'd be looking at persistent underspends over time and outliers compared to others. And it's not necessarily about so I'd also say that we're not necessarily looking to use this to decide whether organizations get funding at all, but it's more about making sure that the amount of funding they get is appropriate and is going to be utilized, because if it's not, then it could easily be better spent elsewhere. So it's not necessarily about kind of being punitive. It's about making sure that we ensure that organizations get an amount of money that the track record suggests that they can easily manage and use across time.
Thanks, Pete. Next question. As the widening participation threshold has now been raised to 35,000, are we still required to collect students' receipts for travel grant and readiness to travel?
Can I bring Helen or Emma in on that one?
Yes, I'm happy to take that one. Yes, you do still need to collect receipts for travel and readiness to travel, because you need to have the evidence available to us for assurance purposes if you were called on to provide assurance evidence.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, a question that has been raised from Louisa. Are there any planned improvements to the reporting tool for 2026-27? Reconciling actual spend against DFE calculated totals was very challenging in 25-26. It would be very helpful for institutions to see how funding has been calculated at an individual student level.
Okay, so there are no plans to offer that as part of our reporting tool at this point in time. The reporting tool will remain as it is, but we are looking at making improvements for the final reporting process.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you. Next question. Does information provided in the narrative application, that is the context for underspends, get seen by DFE when making the allocations, or are they only read by assessors scoring applications?
So this is the first year that we will have used the distant underspend data to do that. So we're still designing the process, but we will. So previously in the past, allocations would have been made looking at overall application scores and the makeup of the institution of the profile with regards to disadvantage and send. So this is the first year we'll be doing that, but we're still working out how we'll do that. But we will consider how we use that narrative information as part of that. So not much more I can say on that now, I think, unless anything else to add, Becca?
No, we can't give any further details at the moment, but after allocations is over, we will be able to give more detail on how we've done that.
Thank you both. Pete, I think this one is also for you. Referring back to the earlier question regarding students who might be returning to their home countries, what would appropriate evidence of having considered the outcomes of the placement over alternatives look like? Is this mainly about explaining why the student would not be able to access similar benefits or opportunities elsewhere? Or is the focus more on demonstrating that the context environment of the placement is significantly different to those previously experienced by the student in that country?
So I would say both of those things would be relevant. So we would be asking you to produce this on request if we saw that in the reporting data you had a high volume of students who it would appear were going back to those countries. So both those things would be relevant. We don't have it like with many of the things where we're just asking you to ensure that you're confident and you're justified in your assessment. We don't have a set format for it, but I would say both considering whether that's an appropriate destination for that student, in terms of them getting opportunities they wouldn't get elsewhere, and whether they're getting a sort of an experience they wouldn't get elsewhere or they haven't had previously would both be relevant things to consider as part of that assessment.
Thanks, Pete. Next question. What evidence do you accept for income, as bursaries usually cover up to 30,000? So how do we evidence non-bursary student household income?
So providers do use a range of different incomes. And again, what we're looking for is your confidence that you've done everything you can to assess that. So some providers use self-declaration. Some providers ask for evidence such as payslips, etc. There are a range of different things you can use. What we're looking for is really that you are confident that based on the best faith assessment you can do, students meet those income thresholds, and that you are confident that students share those characteristics of financial disadvantage. So there are a range of things that you can use, and we don't set a prescriptive list.
Thank you, Pete. The next question is from Alison. So with reference to the previous question raised regarding whether to focus bids on disadvantaged students, I think the issue is that a significant number of institutions are not receiving enough funds to support the most disadvantaged students, whilst others are receiving significantly more than is required to support these groups. This means that the Turing Scheme is not delivering as effectively as it might against its primary goal, and this seems to be a function of it being unclear how bids are being assessed. If a bid is focused 100% or majority on widening participation, is there an algorithm that means these bids receive more funding?
So every year we get the amount of money that providers have asked for in each year of the Turing Scheme is always a lot more than we have available. So when allocating funding, we're often considering how we fund providers, but often how we decide how much of a proportion of the funding they've asked we get. And the main things we consider are the application score, but also the proportion of students from a disadvantaged background in the application. So yes, the proportion of students, particularly from a disadvantaged background, does have a bearing on what proportion of the funding that you've asked for you get. That is a factor. So yes, the answer to that is yes. Obviously, we also put in place minimum protections for how much funding we give somebody. So what that means is that we won't scale bids down below a certain limit. And in previous years, that's been £100,000. So what that might mean is that some organisations look like they're getting all of the funding they asked for, but actually it's because they're below that minimum floor. So they actually get a bigger proportion of what they asked for, because what they asked for initially was a smaller amount. Becca, is there anything else that you'd want to add on that?
No, I think that covers it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Pete. The next question is in relation to environmental impact. In the application, it has a section for destination justification and minimise environmental impact. Whilst we have a fairly broad range of partner destinations, they can be limited by programme, so approved options may require long-haul travel. Also, student choice may mean they wish to go to further away destinations. We have a web page and encourage sustainable travel. Would this be sufficient, or do you have any other suggestions? Is there an understanding that student choice will impact destination?
So obviously I can't be too prescriptive about exactly how to what to put in applications with regards to particular criteria. But what I would look to say is that you set out the reasons for your destination selection, and you could also, that could include setting out the limiting factors, right? So for example, if this person is studying a particular program, let's say they're studying an Asian language, for example, that will obviously limit the options that they can go to. So that would be a valid thing to include as well. So there are a range of things you can put in. There's a limit to how prescriptive I'm going to be on what a high scoring application would be, but there certainly is, of course, like an understanding that there are student choices and there are limits on your ability to select destinations. It's not necessarily that we're against long haul travel. We just want to ensure that the use of it is considered and is mindful and is justified by the things that students are going to do on those placements.
Thank you, Pete. The next question, we have a higher number of students going abroad in 26-27 who are eligible for funding, in part because of the household income increase to 35,000. If we justify that in our written applications, will that overrule the previous participation allocation?
I'm not quite sure what previous participation allocation means in this sense, but allocations are made on a year-by-year basis, and the eligibility criteria that apply for 26-27 apply for 26-27 and not previous years. So if you mean previous participation allocation for this year's funding, that wouldn't be affected. But I may have misunderstood the question, so apologies if so. If you have a further question on that, then please do repost it and I'll do my best to pick it up.
Thanks, Pete. Next question again, possibly for Pete and Helen. I would like to echo Louise's question regarding the reporting tool, including the grants, because the auditors asked for this information and could not understand why it wasn't provided.
Thank you for your feedback on that, Julia. We will take that away and see what we can do, but unfortunately I can't provide any promises on that.
Thanks, Helen. The next question, will there be flexibility in the number of students we fund as we go through the year? We are in a position this year where we are likely to have an underspend as we are capped with the number of students we originally set, but placements have changed over the year and there is money left we could be using if we were able to increase our number and fund more students.
Yeah, I think as Jan's picked up in the comments, there is guidance on circumstances where you can move underspend around between certain categories. That is in the Managing Your Turing Scheme program guide. So hopefully that provides some flexibility. But obviously, if you've got a further follow-up question, then you post it in the chat on the specifics. Then I'm sure we can pick that up. Or perhaps if it's about the current year, then go through to the help desk is probably the best route for that.
Thank you, Pete. Next question. Will grant utilisation be considered from T1? Are the independent bid assessors the ones allocating grant amounts, or will they do the marking?
So yeah, go for it, please, Beth.
Just say we understand that T1 is a bit of a funny year, so although we can't say too much about how we will be doing the grant utilisation, we won't be looking at T1. And as for the second part of the question, the assessors do the marking and then the allocations are done in DFE through our allocation methodology. Anything else you wanted to add, Pete?
No, thanks.
Thank you both. Next question. How did you arrive at the figure of 35,000 as a household income threshold? This is below the household income for two parents on a full-time minimum wage. Would you consider reviewing this? So many disadvantaged students are losing out.
Yeah, so this is like a really difficult thing to get right, and like I understand that there are a range of different views and opinions on this. So there is no single figure that's the Turing Scheme spans 4 countries and overseas territories too. There's no single figure that cuts through all of those countries in terms of schools, FE, and higher education to set a single threshold to define what we would consider to be a disadvantaged student from a disadvantaged background. What was clear to us that the previous suggested threshold of £25,000 was too low, so we wanted to take on board that feedback and look at options. So we picked the £35,000 figure as a figure that was coming through. It was often coming through from providers as a figure around that was often coming through as the figure that they would propose when they were creating their own flexibility within the guidance and using that flexibility. It also is at a helpful midpoint if you look at things like income thresholds for student finance and bursaries in different countries and different entitlements. So it's used it sort of fits around a number of different financial entitlements, but there isn't a single figure that creates a binary line where someone is either disadvantaged or not. We are really keen to make sure we have a suggested guideline figure in the guidance that is not absurdly low in terms of cutting out students that would otherwise absolutely not be able to go, but also is making sure we are still targeting our funding at the students who are least likely to otherwise be able to get an opportunity to go. So those are things I would highlight. I would also highlight that you do have some flexibility to consider students from higher income limits if you are strongly convinced that they share similar characteristics of financial disadvantage. You can provide and capture and record a strong justification for that as well.
Thanks, Pete. Next question, for destination justification, how important is comparison with alternative destinations versus a strong rationale for a chosen one?
I would say that both of those things are kind of relevant, and it sort of depends on the destination. So for example, like it's kind of a bit two sides of the same coin, really. So for example, you might say, this is the only place in the world that we can study this particular thing, study this particular concept. It's the only institution that does it. That's a strong rationale for that, and it's a comparison with an alternative destination as well. Or it might be that there's some great opportunities here, and actually these other placements aren't feasible because of various things. So it could be both of those things. It might be that your set of placements, you particularly want to justify them on as they have a strong rationale on their own basis, or it might be that you particularly want to focus on alternative destinations. So those things could both be relevant.
Thank you, Pete. The next question from Neil, this one might be for Helen. Are there any thoughts on making it possible to bulk upload student details to the reporting tool with the ability to make manual tweaks? This would save such a lot of time.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, we hear you, but unfortunately, it's not technically feasible for us to offer that. But we are looking at offering a download functionality. So you'll be able to download the list of students that you've got on the system and identify where you've got any gaps in the data to be able to make some changes. Unfortunately, that's where we're at with that one.
Thanks, Helen. Next question from Sophie. How do you balance evidencing student income and other characteristics and GDPR? In the past, we have asked students to self-report as well as consulting UCAS data recorded on our student record system in order to avoid asking students for sensitive information. Would asking for and processing financial information be considered fair use in the context of needing to collect this information in relation to Turing Scheme placements?
Apologies, speaking on mute. So unless anyone else on the call feels equipped to answer this one, I think it's one we'll probably have to take away. So personally not a GDPR expert, so can't provide an immediate answer on this one. So we'll need to take that one away unless anyone else on the call is able to pick that up.
I would imagine you'd need to speak to your institution's GDPR specialist to get an answer on that one, but we can take it away and see if we can find anything out.
Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, both. Next question. Should we therefore all bid only for students who solely meet widening participation SEND criteria set by DFE?
So no, so we prioritise students. We prioritise those students in deciding how much funding providers get, but you don't need to exclusively fund those students. We just want them to be prioritised. Providers can and do get funding to send students from a range of backgrounds, which aren't always students from disadvantaged backgrounds or those with SEND. It's just that we prioritise those students when we are looking to award our funding.
Thanks, Pete. This next, I think, is perhaps a comment, but with regard to environmental concerns, geographical location of the sending higher education institute also makes a difference. If you live in the northeast of Scotland, it is a lot more difficult and expensive to reach destinations than if you live near London, for example.
Yeah, we understand that one. And that there's sort of a range of sort of in-country travel often before you can travel out of the UK. Might be worth referencing in your application, but I think in particular we'll be interested in, the assessors will be looking at will be probably generally the distance between the destination and the UK and justification in that terms, as opposed to particularly looking at the travel costs within the UK. But I do take your point that other factors include the internal travel as well.
Yep, thank you. Next question. Feedback on previous applications has been minimal, so it is difficult to know where or how we can improve our next application. If you are not able to provide more detailed individual feedback, can you provide some generic hints and tips, examples of what worked well in successful bids, etc.?
Thanks. So take your point on the previous feedback. what I would say this year is that we do have new application questions. So we're asking these in a slightly different way this year. And I would say that the apply for funding page this year has a lot more information on what we are looking for within it. So when I get a minute, I'll post the link in response to your question, but just to flag that there is more upfront information on the apply for funding page this year, which should help provide you with a bit more clarity on and hints on what the question is looking for. There's obviously a balance for us between providing those hints and being prescriptive about what you should put in there, which obviously we don't want to do.
Thank you, Pete. Next question. To address underspending, have you considered reallocating funding during project implementation from universities that are underspending to those that are overspending?
Thanks. So this is like an interesting idea. I think in practical senses, we haven't been able to create a means for us to do this, given the academic year nature of the Turing Scheme cycle, which means that by the time we get a true sense of any underspends, the opportunity to then reallocate that in a fair and a sort of high quality way is very minimal. But we do have considered that question, but it is quite difficult to do within the cycle of the programme.
Okay, next question from Rob. Will you provide any guidance for external auditors on the nature of evidence and level of flexibility that can be exercised per example provided? For example, disadvantaged status. And/or is there any possibility that future audit deadlines might be relaxed? We have found that auditors tend to be cautious on accepting evidence without specific guidance, which has often meant sending questions to the help desk for written confirmation, which can be challenging given the tight turnaround times for completion.
Thanks. I don't know if
should we do that
yeah,
between
thanks,
us, Pete?
Yeah, cheers.
Regarding the guidance for external auditors on disadvantaged status in particular, it is my understanding we don't provide specific requirements for the type of evidence that you gather for disadvantaged status. It is up to you to determine the way that you assess disadvantage, and as long as you've applied that consistently across all your decisions, then the auditor should be satisfied with that. And I think we've provided some additional guidance on that in our Managing Your Turing project guide this year. Regarding the audit deadlines, I'm not going to make any promises. There is a possibility, and we are looking at that. We haven't quite decided what we're going to do for Turing 6 yet. Pete, did you want to add anything else on disadvantage evidence?
No, I think I was going to say the main thing that we're looking to do on disadvantaged evidence is to be open to a range of different sources. I believe this year we did help provide some applicants with some confirmation for their auditors on that might help with that. So I wonder if it's something we can consider as we develop the Managing Your Turing Scheme guidance for this year, and we can take that one away to consider how we might provide some more of that upfront to ease the passage later.
Thanks both. This one might be for Becca. Is there a correlation between the application score and the amount of funding awarded?
Yeah, so just gone back on that, and well, we do take application score into consideration in the allocation methodology, but I can't give any more details on it at the moment, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Becca. Next question. Please, can you give an example of what would be an acceptable similar characteristic of financial disadvantage, and what evidence would we need to provide?
Yeah, so again, would emphasize that we are open to using a range of different things for this. And what we're looking to do is that you are confident that students share these characteristics. So we don't have a prescriptive list of things and indicators you can use. We just want you to be confident that you believe that in good faith, these students share these characteristics. One thing that a number of providers use, as Jan has referenced, are locational based indicators. So that might be the student's like home postcode. You can put that compare that against a range of different indicators to assess their disadvantage status. Other colleagues have mentioned already that they speak to their internal student finance teams to ask for confirmation of loan status as well. So again, we don't set a prescriptive list of acceptable evidence points. The key thing we're looking for is for you to be confident that you've got a justification and you've captured the reasons why you think those students should be included in good faith. And we're not looking to penalise anyone for having made their best possible attainment, best possible assessment of students' income status.
Thanks, Pete. And just linked to that, the next question, is it appropriate to ask students to provide evidence of full maintenance loan when identifying low-income households?
Yeah, so I don't believe there are any issues from our side of things, but I can see a couple of colleagues have jumped in there to confirm what they do, but we don't have a particular issue on that from the Turing Scheme side of things. Obviously, you may have internal guidelines around that.
Thank you. Next question from Julia. I know this was raised in previous rounds, but has any more thought been given to allowing institutions the discretion to award less than the standard monthly amounts to students? I appreciate the argument was that disadvantaged students need the full grant, and that's why this discretion was not allowed. But surely a simple solution would be to say that widening participation, ASN, etc. students must get a full grant, and students who don't meet any of the priority categories could get partial funding.
Thanks. So take on board the feedback. Not something we are able to quickly change, and the reason the way that we set up the Turing Scheme and the accompanying processes and the structures behind that are all quite deeply set in all of the systems around how we manage the scheme and the finance and things like that. So do take on board your feedback on that, but it's not going to be something that we are going to be able to do this year, as unfortunately within our systems it's not as simple as it might otherwise seem.
Thanks, Pete. Next question, widening participation students going on placement may end up taking cheaper flights with more stopovers, which makes those journeys less environmentally friendly. In light of this, could the travel grant be increased?
Yeah, thank you. I think I would say up front that we're not going to be changing the rates for this year. And the reason, so it's really difficult. We always have a conundrum between within a limited budget with ever increasing demands, the grant rates that we provide as a contribution versus the number of students that we can support and the number of institutions and how much individual institutions get. So those three things are always slightly in competition with each other. So unfortunately, we won't be increasing the travel grant, but do take on board your feedback and would bear in mind that you do have some flexibility to use underspend to support travel costs of students where they go over that point. So within the travel grant, you can use underspend to support other students' travel costs as well.
Thanks, Pete. I think the next is a clarification point from Julia. My point about being in a rural destination was more about making it more difficult to travel in a green manner, as rural destinations don't have so many choices. It is far easier and time effective to get a train to Spain from London than it is from Aberdeen.
Sorry, just catching up with the question again. Okay, yeah, that's helpful. That's a useful reflection. I mean, I guess the thing I would say is there's lots of nuance in how we take into account different organizational circumstances and different institutions in the application. If you've kind of particular concerns about the circumstances of your institution that you want to be taken into account in the assessment, then it would definitely be worth referring to those things in your application.
Thanks, Pete. Next question, could a disadvantage criteria be that students reside in an area of multiple deprivation postcode?
Yeah, I think we mentioned this already, but like I think yes. Yes, if you like that's an indicator that a student is likely to share those characteristics of financial disadvantage. So yes, that could be. Again, we don't provide a prescriptive list of those things, but that is an indicator that a student may well, the balance of probabilities, be from a household that has a household income under that core definition. So you could definitely use that. Yeah.
Next question. This might be a couple of questions together, but since there is a shortage of funding, surely it would be better to ask all institutions to bid solely for disadvantaged or SEND students, therefore ensuring all of these students at all institutions are fully funded. When submitting our application, we want to ensure we secure enough to fund all of our disadvantaged students, but because funding is open to all, we include all of our eligible students. Doing so then brings our proportion of disadvantaged students down, which we assume is then impacting our funding allocation to the detriment of our disadvantaged students. It feels like we are playing a game for which the rules are not clear. If we reduce our overall bid, do we risk a reduced award, or would we be better off given our disadvantaged proportion would be higher?
So I guess the question of eligibility for the scheme is quite a big policy question. The Turing Scheme was set up as a scheme that's intended to support students from a range of backgrounds with a priority for students from disadvantaged groups and with SEND. It, in practice, does support students from both those disadvantaged backgrounds and from other backgrounds. And we are mindful of the potential inadvertent effects of making extremely binary rules in the system that would create cutoffs. So if you were to introduce a disadvantaged or SEND only system, that would mean that you would have to operate extremely hard thresholds to define who is in and out, and therefore risk creating cutoffs, which we try our best to smooth with giving you discretion around how you implement those criteria, although we understand that that has its own complexities. It's also a much bigger policy question than one that we could particularly answer in this call, I'm afraid. On the second part of the question, so I guess on the bigger sort of point around allocation rules, every year we need to look at how we best divide up the money to best meet the scheme's aims, and we need to reserve a bit of ability to look at the data and the profile of funding across different organisations and react to that. So it's quite hard to sort of say and advise on individual circumstances and encourage people to put in particular profiles of applications, given that, because we can't always sort of predict exactly how the final set of data is going to go down. But we take on board your feedback. We'll be sort of we'll consider any adverse effects in that. Becca, is there anything else that you'd want to add there?
No, but just to reiterate your point that we do need to keep some flexibility in our allocation methodology, and that is why we can't give much more detail than what we put in the guidance, and obviously for fairness for everyone to have the same information available to them. So that is why we keep some things.
Thank you. I think I'm just mindful of time. But I think we've got one question here.
Yeah, there's one last question. So how do you ensure that institutions are bidding based on genuine and realistic expected student numbers? In previous years, bid inflation was an issue, and I was wondering whether you have any plans to address this.
Yeah, so as we mentioned in this call, this year, as we put in the guidance, we will be we may consider previous grant utilization across multiple years of the scheme as a factor in considering how much we choose to allocate individuals, so that individual organizations, so that if particular organizations that are have persistently underspent and are kind of clear kind of outliers, we have the ability to take that into account when we're deciding how much funding they get. So hopefully that will be a way of tackling that. The other thing I would say is that we will, I guess we look at the data on the actual participation of students with disadvantaged backgrounds, and we'll publish some more data on that in due course, where you'll get to see a bit more about how many students are actually going on placements versus the planned numbers as well. But we do monitor that too. Okay, I think that takes us up to time, I think. Am I handing back to you, Martin?
Yes, please. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time today and for all of the questions that we've received. We hope that this has been helpful for you. I'll just leave you with next steps. Obviously, read and check the guidance. Keep preparing your project applications. If you do need help and you've got any further questions that emerge, contact the help desk. And bear in mind the application window closes at 4 p.m. on the 16th of March 2026. Thanks once again for your time today, and all the best for your applications.